sky over Dallas on November 22, 1963, was a piercing, brilliant blue, the kind of unblemished canvas that makes the tragedy about to unfold seem all the more surreal. It was a day that began with the promise of political reconciliation and ended with a nation losing its innocence. A trauma so profound that it fractured the American psyche in a way that has never fully healed. Welcome to DCF Investigations, where today we are opening the files on the most scrutinized, debated, and agonizing crime in modern history. We are traveling back to the moment the 20th century changed course, deep into the heart of Texas, to examine the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This is not merely a story of a shooter and a victim, but a labyrinth of Cold War paranoia, Mafia blood oaths, intelligence failures, and a mystery that deepens with every passing decade. To understand the assassination, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of 1963. The United States was standing at a precipice. The Cuban Missile Crisis of the previous year had brought the world to the brink of nuclear annihilation, leaving a lingering scent of fear in the air. The civil rights movement was boiling over, challenging the established social order of the South. President Kennedy, young, charismatic, and undeniably glamorous, represented a new frontier, but he was far from universally loved. In Dallas, a city known for its fierce independence and conservative fervor, the political climate was hostile. Handbills circulated on the streets, accusing the president of treason, and the local sentiment was a powder keg waiting for a spark when the trip to Texas was politically calculated. Kennedy needed to bridge a rift in the state's Democratic Party between Governor John Connally and Senator Ralph Yarborough to ensure he could carry Texas in the upcoming 1964 election. The itinerary was grueling. A whirlwind tour of San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth, culminating in the motorcade through downtown Dallas. As Air Force One touched down at Love Field at 11:40 in the morning, the reception was surprisingly warm. The President and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, dressed in her iconic pink Chanel suit and pillbox hat, were greeted by cheering crowds. It seemed, for a fleeting moment, that the fears of hostility were unfounded. The presidential limousine, a modified dark blue Lincoln Continental convertible codenamed SS-100X, was entirely open, and the bubble top, which was not bulletproof, had been removed to allow the president to be more visible to the electorate. In the driver's seat sat Secret Service agent William Greer, with Roy Kellerman beside him. Behind them, on the jump seats, sat Governor Connally and his wife, Nellie. In the rear, the president sat on the right, with the First Lady on his left. The motorcade wound its way through the city, a 10-mile route designed to maximize exposure. The crowds were thick, enthusiastic, shouting their adoration. As the limousine turned off Main Street onto Houston Street, and then made the sharp 120-degree turn onto Elm Street, entering Dealey Plaza, the mood was jubilant. Nellie Connally turned to the president and famously remarked, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy replied, "No, you certainly can't." Those were likely the last words he ever heard. At 12:30, as the limousine passed the Texas School Book Depository, the sharp crack of a rifle shattered the air. Witnesses later described it as sounding like a firecracker or a backfire. The first shot famously missed or caused a non-fatal wound, sparking confusion rather than immediate panic. But seconds later, tragedy struck with brutal precision. A bullet pierced the president's back, exiting through his throat. Governor Connolly, reacting to the sound, was also struck, the bullet traversing his back, chest, wrist, and thigh. The car slowed, a fatal error in protocol that has been debated for decades. Then came the final, devastating blow. A third shot struck the president in the head, a catastrophic impact that was captured on the home movie camera of Abraham Zapruder, a dressmaker standing on a concrete pergola. The film, just 26 seconds long, would become the most analyzed piece of evidence in criminal history. The scene inside the limousine was one of absolute horror. Jacqueline Kennedy, in a state of shock, climbed onto the trunk of the moving car, reportedly reaching for a piece of her husband's skull. Though she would later have no memory of this action. Secret Service agent Clint Hill, displaying immense bravery, sprinted from the follow-up car and leaped onto the back of the limousine, pushing the First Lady back into her seat and shielding the president's body as the car finally accelerated, speeding toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. The trauma room at Parkland became the center of a desperate, a futile struggle. Doctors and nurses, surrounded by the most powerful men in the world, worked feverishly to revive a man who was already gone. The president's injuries were massive and unsurvivable. At 1 o'clock, just 30 minutes after the shots were fired, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pronounced dead. The announcement to the world came shortly after, delivered by a tearful Walter Cronkite, whose removal of his glasses to check the time became an emblem of the nation's collective grief. But while the world wept, a manhunt was already underway in Dallas, one that would lead to a chaotic and violent conclusion. Approximately 45 minutes after the assassination, a Dallas police officer named J.D. Tippit stopped a man resembling the suspect description in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. The man, Lee Harvey Oswald, he approached the patrol car, exchanged words, and then drew a revolver, shooting Tippit 4 times at point-blank range. This second murder, often overshadowed by the events in Dealey Plaza, is crucial to understanding the timeline and the desperation of the suspect. Oswald fled to the nearby Texas Theater, slipping in without paying. Police, tipped off by a shoe store manager who had noticed Oswald's suspicious behavior, surrounded the theater. As the house lights went up, Oswald attempted to draw his gun again, but was subdued after a brief struggle. As he was hauled out in handcuffs, he shouted that he was a patsy, a claim that would fuel conspiracy fires for generations. Lee Harvey Oswald was an enigma wrapped in a riddle. Over a 24-year-old former Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union only to return to the United States with a Russian wife, Marina. He was a self-proclaimed Marxist who had been monitored by the FBI and the CIA. He had found work at the Texas School Book Depository just weeks before the assassination. Evidence mounted quickly against him. A Mannlicher Carcano rifle was found on the 6th floor of the depository, hidden between boxes of books. 3 spent shell casings were found near the window, which became known as the sniper's nest. Palm prints and fibers linked Oswald to the weapon. However, the American public would never see Oswald stand trial. 2 days later, on November 24th, as Oswald was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby lunged from a crowd of reporters in the police basement. On live national television, witnessed by millions, Ruby fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The assassin was dead. The man who could have answered the world's questions was silenced. And with his death, The door to the truth was slammed shut, leaving room for infinite speculation. To quell the rising tide of rumors and panic, President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had been sworn in aboard Air Force One with a blood-stained Jackie Kennedy standing beside him, established the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, commonly known as the Warren Commission. Led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, the commission spent months analyzing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and consulting experts. In September 1964, they released their 26-volume report. Their conclusion was definitive. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy, domestic or foreign. Jack Ruby also acted alone. The cornerstone of the Warren Commission's conclusion was the single bullet theory, derisively called the magic bullet theory by skeptics. The commission posited that a single bullet entered Kennedy's back, exited his throat, entered Connolly's back, shattered his rib, exited his chest, smashed his wrist, and embedded itself in his thigh. This theory was necessary to explain how 3 shots could cause 7 wounds in 2 men within the time frame dictated by the Zapruder film. While ballistics experts have since used modern reconstruction to show that the alignment of the men in the car makes this trajectory possible, at the time, and for decades after, it seemed to defy the laws of physics, suggesting the bullet zigzagged in mid-air. The official story did not satisfy the public. Discrepancies in the autopsy, the destruction of notes, the loss of the president's brain during the examination, and the rushed nature of the proceedings created a vacuum of trust. The autopsy, performed at Bethesda Naval Hospital, was criticized for being conducted by military pathologists who were not specialists in forensic pathology and who were allegedly under pressure from military brass to conclude the examination quickly. The location of the wounds, specifically the back wound and the head wound, became subjects of intense debate. Many doctors at Parkland, who saw the president first, initially described the throat wound as an entry wound, which would imply a shooter from the front, contradicting the lone gunman theory. As we delve deeper into the investigation, we must explore the shadowy realm of conspiracy theories, not as mere flights of fancy, but as alternate historical narratives that have been investigated by researchers, historians, and even a congressional committee. The most enduring theory involves the Grassy Knoll. Dealey Plaza is a natural amphitheater, and many witnesses reported hearing shots coming from behind a wooden stockade fence on a grassy hill to the right front of the motorcade. Some claimed to smell gunpowder, others saw a puff of smoke. If a shot came from the Grassy Knoll, it meant there was a second gunman, and therefore a conspiracy. The list of potential conspirators is long and filled with powerful enemies of the president. First, there is the Mafia. The Kennedy administration, led by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, was waging an unprecedented war on organized crime. Mob bosses like Carlos Marcello of New Orleans, Santo Traficante of Florida, and Sam Giancana of Chicago had deep grievances. Theories suggest the Mafia worked with anti-Castro Cubans or rogue CIA elements to eliminate Kennedy. Jack Ruby's connections to the underworld fueled these suspicions. Was Ruby ordered to silence Oswald to prevent him from revealing a mob plot? Then there is the CIA. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 was a disastrous failure, for which Kennedy publicly took responsibility, but privately blamed the CIA. He famously threatened to splinter the agency into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He fired the legendary CIA director Allen Dulles, who, ironically, he would later serve on the Warren Commission. Theorists argue that a rogue faction within the CIA, fearing Kennedy's softness on communism and his desire to de-escalate tensions with the Soviet Union and Cuba, orchestrated the assassination to protect the national security state. We must also consider the geopolitical angle. Tensions with Cuba were at an all-time high. The CIA had been trying to assassinate Fidel Castro for years, often utilizing Mafia assets. Did Castro retaliate? While Castro denied involvement, stating that killing a U.S. president would be suicide for his country, the intrigue remains. Conversely, anti-Castro exiles felt betrayed by Kennedy's refusal to provide air support during the Bay of Pigs and his resolution of the missile crisis, which guaranteed the U.S. would not invade Cuba. Even Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson has not escaped scrutiny. The theory posits that LBJ, facing political ruin and potential jail time due to corruption scandals, and driven by an insatiable lust for power, orchestrated the killing to take the presidency. While historians largely dismiss this, the suspicion highlights the deep distrust of authority that the assassination engendered. In 1976, in response to growing public doubt, the United States House of Representatives established the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or HSCA, to reinvestigate the murders of JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. In 1979, the HSCA released a bombshell report. Unlike the Warren Commission, the HSCA concluded that President Kennedy was likely assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, and their conclusion relied heavily on acoustic evidence from a police motorcycle radio that appeared to record 4 shots, one coming from the Grassy Knoll. Although this acoustic evidence has since been challenged and largely discredited by scientific panels, the committee's finding of a probable conspiracy remains on the official record, validating the suspicions of millions. The forensic evidence remains a battleground. The Zapruder film shows the president's head snapping back and to the left after the fatal shot. To the layman, this indicates a shot from the front, pushing the head backward. However, ballistics experts argue that a phenomenon known as the jet effect, where the explosion of brain matter out the front pushes the head backward, combined with a neuromuscular spasm, explains the movement consistent with a shot from behind. The pristine bullet found on Governor Connolly's stretcher, which supposedly caused all the damage to both men, was found in near-perfect condition, leading skeptics to believe it was planted. We must also look at the strange anomalies that surround the case. The 3 tramps, 3 well-dressed men found in a boxcar near the plaza, were arrested and released without barely a record, leading to wild speculation about their identities, ranging from CIA hitmen to Watergate burglars. There is the Umbrella Man, the only person in Dealey Plaza holding an open black umbrella on a clear, sunny day, standing right where the shots were fired. Was he signaling the shooters? He later came forward to explain he was protesting the appeasement policies of Joseph Kennedy, the president's father, whose symbol was a black umbrella, but the image remains haunting. The investigation into the assassination did not end in the 60s or 70s. It continues today in the digital age. The JFK Records Act of 1992 mandated the release of all assassination-related documents. While thousands of files have been released, revealing U.S. government knowledge of Oswald's visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City, A significant number of documents remain redacted or withheld, ostensibly for national security. This continued secrecy only serves to feed the belief that the full truth is too dangerous to be known. We must analyze the psychological profile of Lee Harvey Oswald in greater depth. Was he a lone wolf seeking notoriety? He had attempted to assassinate right-wing General Edwin Walker months prior, a fact that suggests a predisposition to political violence. His life was a series of failures and rejections. He was a man who wanted to be great, to be a revolutionary hero, but was consistently marginalized. The assassination provided him the ultimate platform. Yet, his cry of, "I am just a patsy," echoes through history. Was he a useful idiot, manipulated by intelligence handlers who set him up to take the fall? The fact that he was an inaccurate shot in the Marines, yet pulled off 2 difficult shots in seconds at a moving target, is a discrepancy that proponents of the lone gunman theory struggle to explain away without relying on luck. The city of Dallas itself was put on trial in the aftermath. It became known as the City of Hate, a stigma that took decades to shed. The Texas School Book Depository is now a museum, and the 6th-floor museum, dedicated to the life and legacy of JFK Dealey Plaza, looks remarkably similar today as it did in 1963. A frozen tableau of a crime scene. The X on the pavement marking the spot of the fatal shot is a grim pilgrimage site for tourists. The legacy of the assassination is not just about who pulled the trigger. It is about the death of trust. Before 1963, Americans largely believed in their government and their institutions. After Dallas, after Vietnam, after Watergate, all of which flowed from the timeline shift of that November day, cynicism became the default setting of the American mind. The assassination spawned the modern era of conspiracy theories, teaching us to question the official narrative, to look for the man behind the curtain. As we stand here today, over 60 years later, the question remains, why does it still matter? It matters because justice has no expiration date. It matters because if a president can be murdered in broad daylight with no clear accountability beyond a man who was himself murdered days later, then the foundations of democracy are fragile. Modern forensic techniques, such as digital reconstruction and DNA analysis, have been applied to the case. But the degradation of evidence over time makes a definitive scientific conclusion increasingly difficult. We have walked through the timeline, the ballistics, the suspects, and the theories. We have seen the grieving widow, the saluting son, the smirking suspect, and the vigilante nightclub owner. We have looked at the mob bosses and the spies. The tapestry of the JFK assassination is vast. It's woven with threads of truth and deception that are nearly impossible to disentangle. Whether you believe in the lone gunman or a vast conspiracy, the tragedy remains the same. A father, a husband, and a leader was taken, and the world was left to pick up the pieces in the shadow of a mystery that refuses to die. This case is an open wound in history. It challenges us to keep digging, to keep asking questions, and to never accept the surface level of events. We at DCF Investigations are committed to shining a light into these dark corners. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the assassination of John F. Kennedy. This is a story that belongs to all of us, a puzzle that perhaps will never be fully solved, but one that we must never stop trying to understand. What do you believe happened in Dealey Plaza? Was it Oswald acting alone? Or was there a second gun on the Grassy Knoll? Who stood to gain the most? Leave your thoughts and your theories in the comments below. The most compelling arguments often come from you, the viewers. If you value this kind of in-depth, exhaustive analysis, make sure you are subscribed to DCF Investigations so you never miss a case file. Until next time, keep your eyes open and question everything.